June 10, 1944, Saipan, Mariana Islands, 2nd Lieutenant David C. Schilling, 318th Fighter Squadron, 325th Fighter Group, United States Army Air Forces, age 22, at 063, 5 hours the engines of 72P, 47D Thunderbolts began turning over the coral strip at Aslido Field. The runway had been hacked out only weeks earlier, its surface still rough, its perimeter ringed by bulldozed revetments and stacked fuel drops. The air was already heavy with humidity rising off the Pacific. Mechanics wiped oil from cowling seams with rags stiffened by salt air. The pilots stood beside their aircraft in partial shade cast by the broad wings. They wore khaki shirts darkened beneath the arms, parachute harnesses resting loosely at their sides. The briefing had been delivered 40 minutes earlier beneath a canvas tarp stretched between trucks. The target, the Tokyo area. Primary objective, escort B-29 superfortresses from the 73rd Bombardment Wing. Distance, approximately 1,500 miles round trip. Estimated flight time, 8 hours. It would be among the longest fighter escort missions yet attempted in the Pacific. Schilling's aircraft, a Republic P-47D-25. RE, serial number 4226418, bore the familiar weight of 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns in its wings. Each gun carried 425 rounds, full internal fuel, plus 250-gallon drop tanks mounted under the wings. With tanks attached, the Thunderbolt's range could approach the distance required, if flown precisely according to the fuel plan. The margin was thin. The P-47 was not designed for such distance. It had been built for durability, high-altitude performance, and firepower. Powered by a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial engine, producing 2,000 horsepower, it could absorb damage that would cripple lighter fighters. Its empty weight exceeded 10,000 pounds. Fully loaded, it approached 17,000. Its thirst for fuel was constant. At 0710 hours, the first flight rolled down the strip. The Thunderbolts lifted one by one, wheels retracting into broad wells beneath the fuselage. Schilling climbed in loose formation, adjusting mixture and propeller pitch, maintaining prescribed manifold pressure to conserve fuel. Below them, the Pacific stretched unbroken. There would be no diversion fields, no intermediate refueling. If calculations proved wrong, the only landing surface between Saipan and Tokyo would be water. At 18,000 feet, the formation settled into cruise. The B-29s appeared ahead as faint silver glints against the sky, climbing steadily. The Superfortress was a new machine, pressurized remote-controlled gun turrets protruding like glass domes along the fuselage. It could cruise higher than most Japanese interceptors, but it was not immune. Early raids had demonstrated that unescorted bombers over Japan faced concentrated resistance. Schilling's squadron positioned itself slightly above and to the rear of the bomber stream. The fuel gauges, mounted low on the panel, began their slow downward movement within the first hour. By the third hour, the Pacific below gave way to faint outlines of coastline. The Japanese mainland resolved gradually through haze. The weather report had indicated scattered cloud layers over Honshu, base at 6,000 feet, tops at 12,000. Above, thin cirrus streaked the upper atmosphere. The radio remained mostly silent. Fuel conservation was priority. Engines were leaned aggressively. Throttle movements were minimal. Formation discipline held steady. At 11:18 hours, anti-aircraft bursts appeared near the lead bomber groups. Black puffs expanded and dissolved along predictable arcs. The B-29s maintained altitude. Bomb bay doors opened in sequence. Moments later, radar operators in Japan had already tracked the formation. Fighter units scrambled from airfields surrounding Tokyo. Nakajima-ki 4-4 Tojo interceptors, Mitsubishi A6M0s modified for homeland defense, and Kawasaki-ki 6 Wantoni fighters with liquid-cooled engines. Schilling saw the first contrails forming above the bomber stream. Bandits, 11 o'clock high, came the call over VHF. He pushed the throttle forward. The R2800 responded with a deep, rising vibration that traveled through the airframe. Drop tanks were jettisoned in near unison across the squadron. 2 aluminum shapes fell away beneath his wings, tumbling toward the cloud layer. Without external fuel, the Thunderbolt was lighter, more responsive, and irrevocably committed. The first Japanese fighters dove from altitude, aiming for the bomber's forward elements. Schilling rolled inverted and pulled through into a descending intercept, building speed past 400 miles per hour. The P-47's mass allowed it to gain velocity rapidly in a dive. A key 6-1 crossed his sight line from left to right at approximately 300 yards. He led the target slightly, squeezed the trigger. 8 Brownings fired in convergence. The recoil was steady, controlled. Tracer streams met the Japanese fighter just aft of the cockpit. The key 6-1 shuddered, emitted a brief trail of dark smoke, then entered a shallow dive. Schilling did not watch it impact. Another Zero climbed beneath him, turning tightly in an attempt to gain position. The Zero's lighter airframe allowed for sharper turns at lower speed. Schilling avoided sustained horizontal maneuvering. Instead, he climbed in a wide arc, using altitude to reset his attack. Fuel consumption increased immediately under combat power. The engagement fragmented into multiple individual fights. B-29 gunners fired from dorsal and ventral turrets, streams of tracers interweaving through the sky. At 11,400 feet, Schilling spotted 2 Zeros attempting a stun attack on a bomber. He dived again, this time approaching from above and slightly behind. He fired a 2-second burst at the trailing Zero. The aircraft rolled sharply right, losing wing integrity near the root. It separated mid-air. The second Zero broke left and downward. Schilling followed briefly but checked his descent at 9,000 feet. He glanced at the fuel gauge. The needle had moved farther than expected. He pulled up and rejoined 2 elements of his squadron. The bomber formation had begun its turn toward egress. Smoke columns rose faintly from industrial districts below. Tokyo's coastline curved away to the south. Japanese interceptors regrouped for another pass. A key 4-4 approached head-on, nose-mounted armament flashing. Schilling offset slightly, minimizing closure angle, then fired as the distance closed under 400 yards. The key 4-4 passed beneath him, trailing flame from the engine cowling. 3 confirmed victories would later be recorded for the mission. The sky gradually cleared of organized resistance. Isolated fighters attempted pursuit as the bomber stream withdrew southeast over open water. Schilling reduced power again, setting mixture carefully. Only then did he look fully at the fuel state. The gauges read lower than briefed projections. The jettisoned drop tanks had not provided the full expected margin. Headwinds over the mainland had been stronger than forecast. The Pacific awaited 1,200 miles of open water between Tokyo and Saipan. At 13:05, as the formation stabilized over the ocean, the squadron leader transmitted a fuel check. One by one, pilots reported remaining gallons. Several were marginal. Schilling's figure placed him near the lower third. The Thunderbolt consumed roughly 200 gallons per hour at cruise under optimal settings. Any deviation would reduce endurance. He leaned the mixture further, watching cylinder head temperature carefully. Too lean, and the engine could overheat or detonate. Too rich in fuel would disappear before landfall. The hours passed with little variation. The B-29s gradually pulled ahead. Some Thunderbolts, having burned more fuel during combat, turned back early toward Iwo Jima, recently captured and now serving as an emergency field. Others pressed on toward Saipan. Cloud layers thickened mid-route. At 15,000 feet, visibility dropped. Schilling descended slightly to remain below the upper deck. The ocean surface was no longer visible. At 15:10 hours, the low fuel warning light flickered once, then remained steady. He recalculated mentally, distance remaining approximately 350 miles, estimated endurance at current setting, borderline. He transmitted his fuel state to his flight leader. "Continue as long as possible," came the response. If necessary, divert to Iwo. But Iwo lay north of their track, and reaching it required fuel he no longer possessed. At 15:42 hours, the engine sputtered briefly. A momentary drop in manifold pressure, he switched to the remaining main tank, adjusted boost pump settings. The needle continued descending. At 16:03 hours, with roughly 150 miles to Saipan, the engine lost power decisively. The R-2800 coughed twice, then settled into silence. The propeller windmilled. The sudden absence of vibration felt unnatural. Altitude, 12,000 feet. Airspeed, 210 miles per hour. Distance to land, unknown but significant. He trimmed for best glide speed, approximately 140 miles per hour. The Thunderbolt's glide ratio was not favorable. Its weight worked against it without power. Cloud cover obscured the ocean surface. No ships were visible. No escort vessels lay within sight. He calculated descent rate against distance. The numbers did not align. He transmitted his position and intent to ditch. There was no reply beyond acknowledgement. At 5,000 feet, he jettisoned the canopy. The slipstream tore it free. He tightened shoulder straps, ensuring the life vest was secure. He checked that the tail wheel was locked in retracted position to avoid cartwheeling on impact. At approximately 1,000 feet, the cloud base thinned, revealing gray water below with moderate swell. Wind direction appeared from the east. He aligned into the wind as best as dead stick control allowed. At 16-17 hours, the P-47 struck the water with a heavy flat impact. The nose dug slightly, but the aircraft remained momentarily intact. He released harness, climbed onto the wing as it began to sink. Within 60 seconds, the Thunderbolt disappeared beneath the surface. He inflated the life vest and deployed the small life raft stored behind the seat. The Pacific closed around him in relative quiet. Other aircraft circled briefly overhead, but could not land. Coordinates were transmitted to air-sea rescue. The distance from Saipan made immediate recovery unlikely. Schilling remained afloat for several hours before a Navy seaplane located him near dusk. He was lifted aboard and transported back to base. The mission was logged as successful. Bomb damage assessments would later confirm industrial disruption in the Tokyo area. Fighter losses were minimal. Japanese interceptor losses included aircraft credited to Schilling. The official report noted fuel exhaustion due to extended combat and stronger than forecast headwinds. In subsequent months, long-range escort missions from the Marianas became routine. Improved fuel planning and forward bases reduced risk. But on that June mission, margin and survival had rested on calculation measured in gallons. Schilling would continue flying combat. By war's end, he would accumulate multiple victories across theaters, later serving in Korea and remaining in the Air Force. The Thunderbolt he flew that day did not return. It rests somewhere in the Pacific, between Japan and the Marianas. Aluminum and steel settled into silt. The mission did not alter the war's trajectory alone. It was one among many sorties that gradually compressed Japan's defensive perimeter and extended American air power closer to the home islands. Yet within that single sortie were contained the essential elements of long-range air war in the Pacific: distance, fuel mathematics, mechanical reliability, disciplined gunnery, and the narrow tolerance between success and loss. On June 10, 1944, one pilot flew to Tokyo, engaged the enemy, and returned not by engine power, but by calculation and survival training. History records the tonnage dropped and the number of aircraft destroyed. It also records the small decisions made inside a cockpit thousands of feet above the ocean, decisions that determined whether a name would appear on a roster the following morning. In the Pacific Air War, fuel was often as decisive as firepower, and on that day, over Tokyo and beyond it, both were expended to their limit. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of World War II, the battles, the strategy, the heroes, and the hidden moments history almost forgot, then you're in the right place. This channel brings powerful, carefully researched World War II stories to life with immersive narration and authentic detail. So if you enjoyed deep dives into history's most defining conflict, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Join us as we uncover the stories that shaped the world.